It's totally crazy to think about, but over the course of the last 6 years of running this YouTube channel, I have reviewed hundreds of different games. Survival stuff, early access projects, and even first-person shooters, but my greatest passion has always been Final Fantasy. This series manages to grow and change over the course of its decades, morphing into new genres, brilliant art styles, and of course even bigger stories within them. But with that being said, there's one game that's always been the hardest for me to talk about, which is Final Fantasy XIV, the MMORPG that's on its own has now become one of the most popular online games ever in all of history. The reason why this is just so difficult to dig into and properly dissect is because a majority of this game is just so different every time you log into it. I mean, it feels like because it has different dungeons and storylines and crafting and stuff like that, it feels like trying to review the state of Texas by just talking about a single mini golf course I like. This game is so big, it's hard for me to talk, but I want to do my best. What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and these are my honest thoughts about the latest expansion of FF14 called Endwalker. As of the writing of this video, I have now played nearly 1,000 hours of the game over the course of the last 2 years. I've done stuff like completed every single boss fight, finished a lot of seasonal events, and of course, made a lot of friends along the way. Endwalker, though, this instantly feels like a wonderful improvement on this already great game. Everything from the graphics to the updated class changes feel like they're going a very long way to make this a more balanced and fun experience. Now, one of the things I feel like has always been the most addictive aspect of Final Fantasy XIV is that you can really do whatever you want. Personally, I love the story and hanging out with my real-life buddies inside the video game, but you can also do stuff like play music in the major cities, collect dramatic outfits so you can look stylish, or compete in some very strange minigames. Like this one right here exists in a huge casino called the Gold Saucer, and in this you have to try and avoid this god swordsman Yojimbo who's knocking over bamboo to try and knock you off the course of this giant platform. It's ridiculous how many different aspects of this game exist, and all of them in very nice harmony. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of Final Fantasy XIV is that there's no one way correctly to play it. Like, none of this is wrong. You can just hang out and have fun and be goofy and log in and do your daily quests if you want, and not beat the hardest bosses on the hardest difficulty, but still get the total experience. I appreciate that. Now let's talk directly about what's been new inside of Endwalker, because this is seriously a great time to jump into the game itself. Now there's not going to be any spoilers whatsoever. There is a lot of fandom that really enjoys the crazy plot lines they weave into each of these different expansions, and I am not going to be the jerk who tries to ruin any of that. I do want to talk vaguely though, just about how I felt about it. As of now, I have finished the entire storyline inside of Endwalker. I've completed the entire main quest, I've done a lot of the optional stuff, and I really appreciate what they've managed to build, because the last expansion was called Shadowbringers. That was a very deep and very heartbreaking tale that also managed to have these themes of hope inside it. Like, it was so seriously well done, it won tons of awards as one of the best written RPGs, despite the fact that it's just add-on content in an MMO. Now, Endwalker, it feels different in tone. I've managed to do a lot of the boss fights and see the side quests and see what they're going for, and while I do enjoy it, this feels a bit more muted in my opinion, because after this decade-long build-up, this is the conclusion to a lot of very major storylines. It's almost depressing to realize that they are wrapping up so many threads of this game. So much of this stuff is really kind of reaching its very beautiful end, and while Final Fantasy XIV will continue to exist, we are going to get future content, big patches, new updates and stuff like that. A lot lot of the threads that have been woven over the course of the last 10 years that this game existed have now been officially tied up. It's still good, but I just wanted these resolutions to perhaps be more extravagant to fit the level of hype we've gotten to. This game is still fun, and they've decided to invent this totally new style of storytelling inside of it that's kind of brilliant. So in a lot of these quests, what happens is you'll pick up a player and then you have this escort quest style conversation. You take the NPC and you guide them through a city or through a zone, and during it there's a lot of optional times where you can stand and talk to them and get more of their opinions on the world, some thoughts, the environments. And it's interesting to have this more natural conversational style to it. I feel like a lot of games, even RPGs in the past that I've loved, even classic Final Fantasy, they do have that problem where it feels like a person just reading script lines at you. It's just this giant exposition dump to get the plot line out. Being able to just casually walk with a character instead and hear what they say about the world around us makes things feel much more natural and cohesive, because this is very much a celebration. Like, this is the end of a lot of different storylines, but Endwalker is also just kind of a big, gigantic victory lap. It's a chance for them to celebrate everything they've done right over the course of this game's evolution. Now, I do want to talk a bit about how the game's rebalancing worked. So, in the past, Final Fantasy XIV is very fun to play. I personally love the freaking combat. When you're doing these dungeons or boss fights, a lot of times this is the typical standard setup for MMOs. There's a person who's supposed to tank all the damage. There's a healer that keeps you all alive. And then the damage dealers, also called the DPS, who stand in the back and blast everything down. Now, in the past, I've kind of thought that the balancing of Final Fantasy XIV could get a bit out of whack. From one expansion to the next, it felt like certain people were always way too strong. A paladin or a healer, or in my case the black mage, could sometimes feel a little bit overpowered, and it took them a while to sort of fix the meta. Well, this time around, Endwalker has perfectly balanced every single class. Everybody feels useful, everybody feels strong. If anybody had a particular weakness, they managed to fix it. Like, as a black mage, one of the major downsides of my class was that previously we had the problem that we were a very immobile fighter. I had to stand there and just cast my spells back to back. Well, now they've given me a lot more of instant cast skills that make it where I can run around during a fight to dodge enemy mechanics, not stand in the fire. It makes me a much more mobile style of damage dealer. And honestly, it changes the class very fundamentally just by making it so I'm not stuck in the corner hoping I don't get one shot. And this does bring me to the new classes that have been invented purely for this expansion. Now, there's two of them. There's the Sage and there's the Reaper. This is essentially a new DPS class and a new healer. Now, I've only had a chance to play the Sage, but I have been playing it pretty extensively thus far. The Reaper is a damage dealer who specializes in doing stuff and stealing souls and putting like dots, damage over time spells on the target. The Sage, though, is the one that really blows my mind, because this is a very, very different style of gameplay entirely. Essentially, the way this works is the Sage is able to do typical heals that just boost somebody's health. They can also put shields on stuff to make it where everybody in the party takes a little bit less damage. But what makes this so dramatically different is the Sage is able to put a buff on a singular party member, like in this case, most of the time the tank, and then the damage you deal will heal your target. So the Sage has these crazy abilities to fire laser beams, set parts of the course on fire, or just blast a target with some pretty heavy damage, and during the course of that, you're healing a party member simultaneously. This also makes while you're playing by yourself pretty cool, because you can actually just put that buff on yourself. When you're hitting targets, you're going to be healing while you're killing. This is a really fun and different style to gameplay itself. I mean, it feels like this big leap forward in advancements. It just feels so different from anything else I've ever played, and I've done a lot of different classes inside of Final Fantasy XIV. You'll also notice that there is a new race that's been added. Typically, there's the little tiny creatures called Lalafels, there's big giant dudes, there's humans that are walking around. Well, there's always been a class called the female Viera. It's a bunny girl, alright? Look, we all call them bunny girls. Well, now there is bunny boys, the male Viera, and I decided to race change into that. The male Viera animations are great. Look, alright, I've got a little bit of a slouch in real life. I'm a 6-foot tall dude. I kind of got in the habit of not sitting with the straightest back. It's kind of funny that the male Viera, in a way, has a slouch himself. I kind of feel like I look like a version of my male Viera in real life, except obviously I'm a lot uglier because I do not look like an anime boyfriend. Speaking of looks though, it does seem like the Endwalker expansion has brought in a new graphics engine for a lot of these new areas. The game looks fantastic. All the new zones, the freaking resolution. I'm playing this on PlayStation 5, and the fact that I can see these beautiful colorful flowers, these huge giant zones, like so much of this is just such a beautiful level of detail that makes every single aspect of it look and play better. I am so impressed that year after year, I'm not sure what kind of art team they have hired there, but this game manages to continually impress me as to how much you can make something look almost surreally realistic. While I'm going through these new cities, checking out the new capital and stuff, it all just looks so believably scaled and built. It makes everything have this wonderful logic to it. I want to live in this world, which is really the biggest compliment you can give to any MMORPG. Now, I do want to say one last complaint I have, which is something I wish they would change. They've promised to fix this in the future, but the major problem of Final Fantasy XIV has always actually been the player versus player combat. In a lot of MMOs, if you're playing them, one of the major appeals to gearing up and doing all the hardest dungeon is to use the weapons you've obtained to kill other players. The competition aspect of it. Like, it's fun to be able to hunt down and best somebody in singular combat. Well, the PvP, the player versus player combat in Final Fantasy XIV, has always been a bit of a letdown. Like, the way you do it, the areas you fight in, these big, gigantic, sloppy kill-em-all fests, they just do not work well. And even now, at level 90, it just doesn't balance very well. It's just not fun. It's just such a weird, chaotic mess. They also take away a lot of your skills while you're playing the PvP. They give you like almost a baby's version of your actual character in order to play, because I guess they don't trust us to have 5 bars worth of abilities. And I wish that they would improve this. Now, here's the weird part. They are going to improve this in the next major update. Now, this probably isn't coming out for months, but they have promised that there's something called Crystal Conflict, which has sort of been described as like Overwatch. It's going to be a more objective style player versus player combat. I am exceedingly excited about that. That sounds like something I'm going to get deeply invested in when it eventually comes out. But even now, even with the still pretty much busted PvP, I love Final Fantasy XIV. I'm still going to log in every single day to do my daily quests, to earn my money, to become a bigger millionaire and buy more real estate inside the video game itself. Because honestly, this is a world I want to participate in. Yes, there's a lot of storylines that have been tied up. Yes, this is the conclusion of sorts to a lot of pieces that have been built inside the Final Fantasy XIV universe. But to me, this is also the beginning. This is the first giant step to the next 10 years of Final Fantasy XIV. I'm not sure I can put a number on this. Typically, at the end of my reviews, I like to go over the ratings board and put a big number on it. But in a game I've already played 1,000 hours of, I feel like that alone is a sign to its quality. The fact that I've spent so much of my life over the course of the last 2 years logging in, playing with my friends, doing treasure maps, and going into weird game show style dungeons. This game is already what I would highly recommend if you are looking for any style of MMO. This is the complete package. Well, these have just been my thoughts on Endwalker as it currently exists. As I always say, with any of my reviews of an online game, it could get better or worse in time. If you watch this in 6 months and the game suddenly sucks, well, don't get mad at me. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a gigantic thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all, and keep dreaming. Oh my god. Well, you know what? Time to go and do another freaking dungeon. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.